Picture a world where a single moment changed everything. November 8th, 1939. The air thick with tension in Munich's Bürgerbräukeller. As Adolf Hitler concluded his annual speech commemorating the beer hall putsch, fate intervened. The bomb that Georg Elser had meticulously planted weeks before detonated precisely as planned, transforming the bustling beer hall into a scene of unprecedented chaos. Unlike our familiar history, where Hitler left the venue early and escaped unscathed, in this alternate timeline, the Führer's shattered body lay among the ruins, forever altering the course of human events. The death of Adolf Hitler in that explosive moment sent shockwaves through the Third Reich, creating a power vacuum that would unleash forces even more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. The Nazi leadership, once unified under Hitler's charismatic but devastating vision, descended into a savage struggle for control. Hermann Göring, Heinrich Himmler, Joseph Goebbels, and other high-ranking Nazi officials immediately began positioning themselves to seize power, each commanding their own loyal factions within the party and military. In the immediate aftermath, Germany teetered on the brink of civil war. The Wehrmacht's high command, led by generals who had long harbored reservations about Hitler's aggressive expansionism, saw an opportunity to reassert military control over the nation. However, they would find themselves facing an unexpected and formidable opponent in Hermann Göring, who emerged as the strongest contender for leadership through a combination of political cunning and brutal efficiency. Göring, unlike Hitler, was not driven by the same ideological fervor or apocalyptic visions. His brand of evil was more calculated, more patient, and ultimately more dangerous. As commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe and Hitler's designated successor, he already possessed significant military support. His connections with German industrialists and his understanding of international politics made him a figure that foreign powers could potentially negotiate with, despite his obvious ruthlessness. The world watched with bated breath as Göring consolidated power through a series of strategic alliances and calculated eliminations of his rivals. Goebbels' propaganda machine initially tried to resist, but Göring's control of the military proved decisive. Himmler and his SS found themselves gradually marginalized, though not eliminated entirely, as Göring recognized their utility in maintaining internal control while presenting a more reasonable face to the international community. As 1939 drew to a close, the new Germany under Göring's leadership presented a dramatically different challenge to the world. The invasion of Poland, already underway when Hitler was killed, continued, but with modified objectives. Göring, understanding the importance of avoiding a two-front war, immediately opened secret diplomatic channels with Britain and France. He portrayed himself as a moderating influence, willing to negotiate territorial settlements while simultaneously strengthening Germany's position through military and industrial preparation. This more subtle approach proved devastatingly effective. While the Western powers remained hesitant and uncertain, Joseph Stalin saw an opportunity in the chaos. The Soviet leader, who had recently secured his portion of Poland through the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, began pushing westward more aggressively. This created a complex dynamic where Western Europe suddenly faced two serious threats: a more methodical but equally expansionist Nazi Germany under Göring, and an increasingly bold Soviet Union under Stalin. The persecution of Jews and other minorities didn't end with Hitler's death. It merely evolved. Göring's approach was more pragmatic but no less horrifying. Instead of immediate extermination, he implemented a system of forced labor and gradual displacement, using Jewish assets and skills to build up Germany's industrial and military might while still working toward their eventual elimination. This more gradual approach made it easier for other nations to turn a blind eye, ensuring that many of the worst atrocities would continue with less international scrutiny. By early 1940, the European political landscape had transformed into something nightmarish yet different from our historical World War II. Britain and France, already at war with Germany over Poland, found themselves paralyzed by indecision. Göring's diplomatic overtures, combined with his careful military positioning, created uncertainty about whether to pursue all-out war or attempt negotiation. This hesitation provided Germany with precious time to strengthen its position and develop new military capabilities under Göring's industrial-focused leadership. The absence of Hitler's impulsive decision-making led to significant changes in military strategy. The invasion of France, when it came, was more methodically planned and executed. Göring's emphasis on air power meant the Luftwaffe was better prepared and more strategically deployed. The Blitzkrieg tactics were refined and improved, incorporating more combined arms warfare and better coordination between air and ground forces. Meanwhile, in the East, Stalin's opportunistic advances created a new dynamic. The Soviet leader, reading the uncertainty in both Berlin and Western capitals, pushed his advantages more aggressively than in our timeline. The Baltic states fell under Soviet influence more quickly, and pressure mounted on Finland and Romania. This created a three-way tension between Göring's Germany, Stalin's USSR, and the Western Allies, each trying to maximize their position while avoiding direct confrontation. The United States, under President Roosevelt, watched these developments with growing alarm. The absence of Hitler's more obvious threat made it harder to rally American public opinion against German aggression. Göring's more diplomatic approach, combined with his maintenance of business relationships with American corporations, complicated the political situation significantly. The America First movement gained more traction, arguing that Europe's problems should remain Europe's concern. In the Pacific, Japan observed these developments with keen interest. The shifting balance of power in Europe influenced their strategic calculations, but without Hitler's erratic leadership to coordinate with, they approached their imperial ambitions more cautiously. This created a different dynamic in Asia, where the threat of war still loomed but followed a different timeline and pattern than in our history. By mid-1940, Göring's Germany had evolved into something perhaps more terrifying than Hitler's Reich. It was a nation guided by cold calculation rather than ideological fury, yet still committed to many of the same horrific goals. The systematic persecution of minorities continued, but under a veneer of bureaucratic efficiency that made it harder for the outside world to protest. The concentration camps remained, but were presented as labor camps contributing to German industrial output, making it easier for foreign businesses to justify continued relationships with the Reich. The technological development of Germany took a different path as well. Göring's focus on practical military applications, rather than Hitler's occasional fascination with wonder weapons, led to more efficient allocation of resources. Jet engine development, radar systems, and other critical technologies progressed more rapidly under the more organized and industrially focused leadership. The resistance movements within Germany and occupied territories faced new challenges. Without Hitler's more obvious madness to rally against, it became harder to unite different factions in opposition. Göring's more nuanced approach to occupation and control, while no less oppressive, proved more difficult to combat. The German military, more fully integrated into the power structure rather than occasionally at odds with Nazi leadership as under Hitler, presented a more unified face of authority. As 1941 approached, the world faced a protracted crisis different from but no less dangerous than our historical World War II. Göring's Germany, more patient and calculating, posed a different kind of threat to world peace. The Holocaust, while taking a different form, continued to claim victims through a more gradual but equally deliberate process. The Soviet Union, more aggressive in its expansionism, created additional complications for any unified response to German aggression. The international order that emerged was perhaps more insidious than the one we know from history. Without Hitler's more obvious madness to unite opposition, the forces of totalitarianism gained ground more gradually, but no less certainly. The question of whether a quick victory over fascism might have been better than this slower, more complex struggle began to haunt political leaders and citizens alike. In this alternate 1941, the world faced a darker reality. The knowledge that removing one tyrant had simply cleared the way for more subtle, more patient, and potentially more successful forms of totalitarian control. The death of Hitler, rather than ending the Nazi threat, had transformed it into something more sustainable and harder to combat. The dream of a quick end to fascism died in the ruins of the Bürgerbräukeller, replaced by a longer nightmare of calculated oppression and methodical conquest. This chilling alternate history forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil and power. The elimination of one dictator, even one as monstrous as Hitler, doesn't necessarily prevent the machinery of totalitarianism from grinding forward. Sometimes it merely allows for the emergence of more effective, more patient forms of oppression. The darkness that spread across Europe in this timeline serves as a reminder that the struggle against tyranny is never as simple as removing a single leader, no matter how evil that leader might be. As we reflect on this alternative path, we're left with a haunting question. In a world without Hitler, did we lose the ability to recognize evil when it wore a more reasonable face? Did the absence of his obvious madness make it harder to unite against the more subtle but equally dangerous forms of totalitarian control? The answers echo through this shadow history, reminding us that the greatest threats to human freedom often come not from obvious monsters, but from those who make monstrous actions seem reasonable and efficient.